The Thomas photographs. A journalist investigates the disappearance of 14 children in 1986. Stirling City, following a trail that leads to missing photographs and an entity that shouldn't exist. The manila envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in July, postmarked 3 days earlier from Stirling City, California. No return address. Inside, a handwritten note on cream-colored stationery. Mr. Chen, I have information about the Thomas case. The photographs Mary took that day, they're not all missing. Meet me at Pinewood Diner, Highway 49, Thursday 2 p.m. Come alone. A concerned citizen. I'd been covering the Thomas case for the Sacramento Bee since the story broke 2 weeks prior. 14 children, ages 7 to 12, had vanished during a summer day camp outing to Stirling City's reservoir park. The only witness was camp counselor Mary Thomas, 23, who'd been found 3 hours later wandering the forest in a dissociative state. Her camera, a professional Nikon she'd been using to document the day's activities, was missing, along with all the film. Local authorities had focused their investigation on the possibility of abduction, but the logistics made no sense. How does someone kidnap 14 children from an open park in broad daylight without leaving tire tracks, footprints, or a single witness besides a traumatized counselor who couldn't remember what happened? I'd built my career on finding rational explanations for seemingly impossible events. The occult murder case in Fresno, the haunted psychiatric hospital in Bakersfield that turned out to be riddled with carbon monoxide leaks. People wanted mysteries, but they needed answers. That's what I provided. The Thomas case, though, something about it felt different from the start. Tikri, Pinewood Diner, squatted alongside Highway 49 like a chrome tumor, its neon sign flickering weakly in the afternoon heat. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a few 18-wheelers and a rust-eaten Buick that had seen better decades. Inside, the air conditioning labored against the July heat, and the smell of coffee and grease hung thick. I took a booth by the window and ordered black coffee, scanning the other patrons. A trucker worked his way through a plate of eggs. An elderly couple shared a piece of pie. A woman in her 40s sat alone at the counter, nervously shredding a napkin. At 2:15, she approached my table. Mr. Chen, I'm Rita Valdez. Her handshake was firm, but her eyes darted constantly toward the parking lot. Thank you for coming. Rita slid into the opposite seat and immediately pulled a manila envelope from her purse. I worked at Photo Express on Main Street. Mary Thomas brought her film to us every week. Professional stuff, mostly nature shots for the local paper. She opened the envelope and withdrew a stack of contact sheets. Strips of small, thumbnail-sized negatives developed, but not enlarged. These are from the day before the incident. Mary dropped them off that Thursday evening. Said she'd pick up the prints on Monday. I studied the contact sheets. They showed typical summer camp activities. Children playing on swings, running through sprinklers, gathered around a picnic table. Nothing unusual, but that's not all. Rita's voice dropped to a whisper. Mary came back Saturday morning, after the children went missing. After she'd been interviewed by police, she was different. Hollow-eyed, jumpy. She demanded all the negatives and contact sheets from that day's roll. The roll from the day the children disappeared. Right. But here's the thing, we'd already developed those. I saw them Friday morning before the news broke. Rita leaned forward. There were things in those photographs. Mr. Chen. Things that weren't there when she took the pictures. The coffee tasted suddenly bitter. What kind of things? A figure, tall, thin, standing at the edge of the woods in the background. In every shot where the children were playing near the forest line, this person was there, but Mary swore nobody else was in the park that day. Rita pulled out a single contact sheet, different from the others. The images were darker, grainier. I kept this one, made a copy before Mary came for the originals. I held the contact sheet up to the light. The photographs showed the familiar scene of children at play, but in the background of each frame, barely visible among the trees, stood a figure, impossibly tall and thin, with elongated limbs that seemed to blend into the shadows. "Did you show this to the police?" Rita shook her head. Mary begged me not to. Said it would just make things worse for her, that people would think she was crazy. And honestly, looking at these pictures, I wasn't sure I believed what I was seeing either. She gathered the contact sheets quickly, glancing around the diner. "I should go. I probably shouldn't have called you, but when I read your articles, you seem like someone who looks for the truth. Can I keep this copy?" Rita hesitated, then nodded. "Just be careful, Mr. Chen. Mary Thomas isn't the same person she was before that day. And I don't think those children just wandered off." Tikri. Back in Sacramento that evening, I spread the contact sheet across my desk and examined each frame under a magnifying glass. The figure was definitely there, a dark, elongated shape that appeared to be watching the children from the tree line. In some frames, it seemed closer. In others, it appeared to have moved to a different position. But photographs could be manipulated. Double exposures, darkroom tricks, even simple shadows could create false impressions. I'd seen dozens of ghost photographs that turned out to have mundane explanations. I called the Stirling City Police Department and asked to speak with Detective Ray Morrison, the lead investigator on the Thomas case. "Chen, right? From the B. Look, I've told you everything I can tell you about this case. I'm calling about Mary Thomas's photographs, the ones from her camera that went missing." A pause. "What about them?" "I have reason to believe some of the film survived, that there might be evidence the investigation missed." "Evidence of what?" I chose my words carefully. "Evidence that there was another person in the park that day, someone Mary might not have noticed. Consciously, but who appears in the background of her photographs." Morrison's sigh carried clearly through the phone line. "Mr. Chen, I've been working missing persons cases for 15 years. You want to know what I think happened? I think Mary Thomas had some kind of psychotic break. 14 kids don't just vanish into thin air, and traumatized witnesses don't always remember things clearly." "But if there were photographs..." "There aren't any photographs. Mary Thomas's camera was never recovered. Neither was any film. Whatever you think you found, I guarantee you it's not related to our investigation." The line went dead. I drove back to Stirling City the next morning, ostensibly to interview more locals for my follow-up article, but really to find Mary Thomas. The police had been circumspect about her whereabouts, citing privacy concerns, but small towns have their own information networks. The clerk at the local grocery store directed me to a rental cabin on the outskirts of town. Tucked away in the pines along Cedar Creek Road, I found it after 20 minutes of driving. Narrow dirt roads, a small A-frame structure with peeling green paint and newspapers taped over most of the windows. Mary Thomas answered the door after my third knock. She was younger than I'd expected, with prematurely grey streaks in her dark hair and the hollow-eyed look Rita had described. She wore an oversized flannel shirt despite the heat, and her hands trembled slightly as she held the screen door. "Ms. Thomas, I'm David Chen from the Sacramento Bee. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about what happened at the park." Her face went pale. "I already told the police everything I remember." "I understand. But I've come across some information that might be relevant to the case, about photographs you took that day." The reaction was immediate and startling. Mary stepped back as if I'd struck her, her hand flying to her throat. "There aren't any photographs. The camera was lost. Everything was lost." I know about Rita Valdez. I know she developed some of your film. Mary's breathing became rapid and shallow. For a moment, I thought she might slam the door, but then she stepped aside. You'd better come in. The cabin's interior was dim and stifling. Every window had been covered with newspapers or dark fabric, and the only light came from a single lamp in the corner. The walls were covered with what looked like children's drawings, crude, crayon sketches that, upon closer inspection, showed disturbing images of stick-figured children being led away by a tall, black shape. The children drew those, Mary said, noticing my stare. In the weeks before it happened, during art time, I kept them because they were all so similar, and that seemed strange. I studied the drawings more carefully. Each showed the same basic elements: a group of small figures representing children, a forest of scribbled trees, and looming over everything, an impossibly tall dark figure with long reaching arms. Did you ask the children about these drawings? Mary hugged herself tighter. They said they were drawing the tall man, said he visited their dreams and told them about the special place in the woods where they could play. Forever, she laughed, a brittle sound. I thought it was just typical kid stuff. Imaginary friends, you know. Tell me about that day at the park. Mary moved to the couch, curling up in one corner like a child herself. It started normally. We had lunch by the playground. Then I suggested we take a nature walk along the forest trail. I was taking pictures the whole time. Candid shots of the kids exploring, collecting leaves, that sort of thing. She paused, staring at something I couldn't see. That's when I started feeling watched, like there were eyes on us from the trees. I kept looking over my shoulder, but I never saw anything. The children were getting excited, though. They kept pointing at the woods and whispering to each other. What were they saying? That he was calling them. The tall man was calling them home. Mary's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. I tried to keep them close, tried to head back to the parking lot, but they started wandering off one by one. First little Jessica, then Marcus and his sister. I kept calling for them to come back, but it was like they couldn't hear me. How many children were with you originally? 14. Always 14 on our Tuesday outings. She looked at me with haunted eyes. I remember taking a picture of them all together, right? Before we started the nature walk, they were lined up in front of the trail marker, smiling and waving. That was the last normal photograph I took. What happened next? Mary's hands began to shake more violently. I followed them into the woods, still trying to call them back. The trees seemed to close in around us, and the light changed. It became grey and dim, even though it was the middle of the afternoon. And that's when I saw him, the figure from the photographs. She nodded slowly, standing between the trees about 50 yards ahead, taller than anyone has a right to be, with arms that hung down past his knees. No face that I could see, just darkness where a face should be. The children were walking toward him, single file, like they were in some kind of trance. Mary stood abruptly and moved to the window, peering through a gap in the newspaper covering. I tried to run to them, tried to stop them, but it was like moving through water. Everything became slow and dreamlike. I remember raising my camera, taking picture after picture, thinking that if I could just document what was happening, someone would believe me. And then nothing. I woke up 3 hours later at the edge of the parking lot with no memory of how I got there. My camera was gone, the children were gone, and everyone thinks I'm either a liar or insane. I spent the rest of the afternoon driving through Stirling City, talking to anyone who would speak with me about the case. The pattern that emerged was troubling. This wasn't the first time children had gone missing in the area. At the local library, I found archived newspaper reports going back decades. 1967-3. Children disappeared during a school camping trip to Reservoir Park. Never found. 1974. Two brothers vanished while hiking with their family. Massive search effort yielded no trace. 1981, a Girl Scout troop reported seeing the tree man during a weekend camping trip. 2 scouts went missing that night. The librarian, a woman named Helen Garrett, who'd lived in Stirling City her entire life, pulled me aside as I was copying articles. "You're researching the old disappearances," she said. It wasn't a question. Among other things. Helen glanced around to make sure we were alone, then leaned closer. "My grandmother used to tell stories about the tall one. Said he'd been taking children from these woods since before the town was founded. Native American kids first, then settler children. Now whoever wanders too far from the safe places. Stories. Maybe. But I've lived here 73 years. And I can tell you this much. Children who go into those woods alone don't always come back. And the ones who do come back, they're different." "Different how?" "Quiet, distant, like they've seen something they can't talk about." Helen pulled a slim, leather-bound journal from beneath the counter. "My grandmother kept records. Every disappearance, every sighting, every strange story. She believed that knowing the pattern might help protect people." She opened the journal to a page near the back. The entries were handwritten in fading ink, but I could make out dates, names, and brief descriptions. July 15th, 1952. Tommy Brewster. Age 8, found after 2 days in woods. Claims tall shadow man showed him the place where children play. Refuses to discuss further. October 3rd, 1959. Sarah Martinez. Age 10, missing for 1 week. Discovered at Forest Edge with no memory of intervening time. Drawings afterwards show elongated figure with outstretched arms. She thought it came in cycles, Helen continued. Every few years, when enough time had passed for people to start forgetting, it would take more children. Always during summer, always from the same general area. Why summer? That's when children are most likely to be in the woods. Day camps, family picnics, hiking trips. Helen closed the journal carefully. My grandmother believed it fed on something. Not flesh, but something else. Innocence, maybe. Wonder. The part of children that makes them trust strange voices. Calling from dark places. I thought about the drawings on Mary Thomas's walls. All those crude depictions of the tall man. Helen, have you ever heard of children drawing the same figure before seeing it? Before any reported sightings or disappearances? Her face went pale. How did you know about that? Mary Thomas showed me drawings her campers, made in the weeks before the disappearance. It's part of the pattern. Children start having dreams about the tall one weeks before he takes them. They draw pictures, tell stories, sometimes even claim to see him in their peripheral vision. My grandmother called it the calling. Helen pulled out a manila folder from beneath the counter. These are photocopies of drawings, found in missing children's bedrooms over the years. The families donated them to the library's local history collection. The drawings were eerily similar to the ones I'd seen at Mary's cabin. Different hands, different ages, but the same basic elements. Tall, dark figure, reaching arms, children being led into forests. Some were more detailed than others. Few even showed the figure's face as a blank white oval with what might have been tendrils or branches extending from where features should be. There's something else, Helen said quietly. The photographs. What about photographs? In the cases where cameras were present, the film always disappeared. But there were stories. People who claimed to have seen the developed pictures before they vanished. They all described the same thing, a figure that appeared in photographs even though no one remembered seeing it when the pictures were taken. My skin crawled. How widespread is this knowledge? It's not knowledge. Mr. Chen, it's folklore, stories, the kind of thing old people whisper to each other but never put in official Reports. Helen leaned back in her chair. But folklore has a way of being truer than facts sometimes. That evening, I returned to Mary's cabin with copies of the historical documentation. She let me in reluctantly, and we sat in her dim living room, surrounded by those disturbing children's drawings. I've found records of similar disappearances going back decades, I told her. Children drawing the same figure, vanishing in the same area, cameras and film going missing. You're not the first person to experience this. Mary was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. Do you believe me now? It was a harder question than it should have been. Every rational part of my mind insisted there had to be conventional explanations. Mass hysteria, copycat crimes, false memories reinforced by local folklore. But the contact sheet from Rita Valdez sat in my briefcase, and those photographs showed something that shouldn't exist. I believe something happened that day, I said carefully. Something that can't be easily explained. I keep having dreams, Mary whispered. Dreams where I'm back in the woods, following the children deeper and deeper into places that shouldn't exist. And in the dreams, I see what he showed them. What did he show them? A place where it's always summer afternoon, where the light is golden and warm, and there are games and laughter and no adults. To tell you when playtime is over. Tears rolled down Mary's cheeks. It looked like paradise, Mr. Chen. No wonder they followed him. But when I try to look closer in the dreams, when I try to see the children's faces, they're empty. Just blank skin where their features should be. Like they gave up everything that made them who they were in exchange for endless play. Mary stood abruptly and moved to a closet I hadn't noticed before. She pulled out a camera, the same model Nikon she'd had at the park. I bought this to replace the one that went missing. I thought if I could go back to the park and take more pictures, maybe I could prove what happened. Document it properly this time. Did you try? Once? Last week? She set the camera on the coffee table with shaking hands. I made it about 50 feet into the woods before I couldn't go any further. But I did take some pictures. Mary opened the camera's back and removed a roll of film. I haven't developed these yet. I'm afraid of what they might show. Let me take them to Rita Valdez. If there's something there we need to know. Mary nodded slowly, handing me the film canister. Promise me something. Mr. Chen, promise me that if these pictures show what I think they show, you'll write about it. Make people understand that those children didn't just disappear. They were taken. Rita Valdez agreed to meet me at Photo Express after hours. We developed the film in the darkroom at the back of the shop, working in red-filtered darkness that made everything feel otherworldly. As the images emerged in the developer solution, my blood went cold. The photographs showed the familiar forest setting, tall pines, dappled shadows, the hiking trail that led deeper into the woods. But in every single frame, standing among the trees at various distances, was the figure, sometimes barely visible as a dark vertical line between tree trunks, sometimes close enough that you could make out the impossible length of its limbs, the unnatural way its arms hung at its sides. But it was the final photograph that made Rita gasp audibly. The figure stood directly in the center of the frame, no longer hiding among the trees. It was tall, easily 8 feet, maybe more, and impossibly thin, like someone had stretched a human form beyond all reasonable proportions. Its arms reached nearly to the ground, ending in what looked like pale, elongated fingers, and where its face should have been was a smooth, white oval, completely featureless, except for what might have been thin, dark lines radiating outward like cracks in porcelain. Behind the figure, barely visible in the shadows, were smaller shapes, child-sized silhouettes standing in perfect stillness among the trees. Jesus Christ, Rita whispered. Mary was telling the truth. I stared at the photograph, my rational mind scrambling for explanations. Double exposure, darkroom manipulation, some kind of elaborate hoax, but the image had the grainy, authentic quality of genuine documentary photography, and the figure's presence in multiple frames at different distances suggested it had actually been moving through the forest when Mary took the pictures. "I need prints of all of these," I said. "Mr. Chen, I don't think—" "Print them. All of them. Full size. High quality." I turned to face Rita in the red darkness of the darkroom. "Whatever this thing is, whatever it's doing to those children, people need to know about it." Rita worked in silence for the next hour, producing glossy 8x10 prints of each photograph. When we finally emerged into the normal light of the shop, both of us looked shaken. "What are you going to do with these?" Rita asked, carefully placing the prints in protective sleeves. "I'm going to write the story," I said. "All of it. The historical disappearances, the children's drawings, Mary's testimony, and these photographs. Let people decide for themselves what to believe. And if nobody believes you, if they think you're just another crazy person chasing monsters." I gathered the photographs carefully, thinking about my career, my reputation, the rational skepticism that had always guided my work. Then at least I'll have tried to tell the truth. I spent the next 3 days writing the most important article of my career. I laid out the evidence methodically, the historical pattern of disappearances, the children's drawings, Mary Thomas's testimony, and finally, the photographs that seemed to document the impossible. I submitted the article to my editor at the Sacramento Bee on a Thursday morning, along with high-quality scans of the most compelling photographs. By Thursday afternoon, I had my answer. "Chen, we need to talk." My editor, Jim Morrison, looked uncomfortable as I entered his office. "About this Stirling City piece." "What about it?" "We can't run it. Not as written." I'd expected resistance, but the finality in his voice caught me off guard. "Why not?" Jim pulled out a manila folder and opened it on his desk. Inside were the photograph scans I'd submitted. But something was wrong. The images showed the same forest scenes, the same lighting and composition. But the figure was gone. Every single photograph showed empty woods. "I don't understand," I said, reaching for the prints. "These aren't the same images I submitted. They're exactly what you submitted." "Chen, I have the original. File's right here." Jim turned his computer monitor toward me. The digital scans were identical to the prints. Empty forest. No sign of the tall figure or the child-shaped shadows. My hands shook as I rifled through my briefcase for the original prints Rita had made. They were there, but they too had changed. The figure that had been so clearly visible just days before was simply gone, as if it had never existed. "The photographs have been altered," I said desperately. "Someone changed them." "Chen, I've known you for 8 years. You're one of the most rational, skeptical reporters I've ever worked with. But this story," Jim shook his head, "it reads like the work of someone having a breakdown. Missing children, mysterious figures, conspiracy theories about disappearing evidence. It's not journalism." I stared at the empty photographs, my mind reeling. "What about Mary Thomas? Her testimony?" "I called Stirling City PD this morning. According to Detective Morrison, Mary Thomas was found dead in her cabin yesterday evening. Apparent suicide. Carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty heater. The room seemed to tilt." "That's impossible. I was just—" "Chen, I think you need to take some time off. Get some rest. Maybe see someone professional to talk through whatever's been going on with you lately." I drove back to Stirling City that evening, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. Mary's cabin was cordoned off with police tape, and Detective Morrison was on site supervising the removal of evidence. "Mr. Chen, I heard you might be coming. Bye." Morrison approached me with the weary expression of a man who dealt with too many tragedies. I'm sorry about Ms. Thomas. I know you'd been interviewing her for your article. Detective, when exactly did you find her? Tuesday evening. Landlord got concerned when she didn't answer the door for a welfare check. Medical examiner says she'd been dead for at least 24 hours. Tuesday. But I'd been at Mary's cabin on Wednesday afternoon, had spoken with her, received the roll of film she'd shot in the woods. That's impossible, I said. I was here Wednesday. We talked. She gave me... Morrison studied my face with concern. Mr. Chen, are you feeling all right? You look pale. I ran to my car and pulled out my notebook, flipping to the pages where I'd recorded my conversation with Mary Thomas. The pages were blank, not erased, blank, as if I'd never written anything on them at all. Mr. Chen? Morrison was beside me now, his hand on my shoulder. I think maybe you should sit down. The world felt unstable, reality shifting beneath my feet like sand. The photographs, I whispered. Rita Valdez at Photo Express. She developed photographs that showed... Mr. Chen, Photo Express has been closed for 3 years. Rita Valdez moved to Portland in 1984. Morrison's voice was gentle but firm. I think the stress of this case might be getting to you. I looked around frantically, trying to anchor myself to something solid, something real. The cabin looked wrong, not just cordoned off, but abandoned, weathered and empty in a way that suggested no one had lived there for months. The children, I said desperately. The missing children. 14 kids disappeared from Reservoir Park 2 weeks ago. Morrison shook his head slowly. Mr. Chen, there haven't been any missing children in Stirling City this summer, or last summer. The most recent disappearance we've had was 3 years ago. Teenage runaway who turned up in San Francisco a week later. I pulled out my briefcase and opened it with trembling hands. The historical documents from the library, the children's drawings, the contact sheets, all gone. The briefcase contained only my normal reporting materials, pens, notebook, tape recorder. I need to get to the library, I said, pushing past Morrison toward my car. Helen Garrett will remember. She showed me the records. Mr. Chen, Helen Garrett died in 1983. The library's been run by her nephew for the past 3 years. I made the drive back to Sacramento in a dissociative haze, my mind struggling to process what was happening. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered, every conversation I'd had, every photograph I'd seen, all of it was simply gone, as if it had never existed. Back in my apartment, I sat at my desk and tried to reconstruct the story from memory, but the details were already fading, becoming vague and dreamlike. Had there really been 14 missing children? Had I actually spoken with Mary Thomas? Or had I dreamed the entire encounter? I called the Sacramento Bee and asked to speak with Jim Morrison. Chen, where are you? You missed the editorial meeting this morning. Jim, what story was I working on in Stirling City? A pause. Stirling City? Chen, you haven't been assigned anything in Stirling City. Your last piece was that municipal corruption story in Stockton. But I submitted an article about missing children and... Chen, are you sure you're feeling all right? You sound confused. I hung up the phone and sat in the growing darkness of my apartment, trying to hold on to the fragments of memory that were slipping away like water through my fingers. There had been something in those woods, something that took children and erased evidence and somehow reached across time and space to unmake the very reality of its existence. The only proof I had left was my own fading memory, and even that was becoming uncertain. I opened my laptop and began to write, racing against the dissolution of recollection, trying to capture what I could before it all disappeared completely. My name is David Chen. I am a journalist for the Sacramento Bee. Something happened in Stirling City, California. In the summer of 1986, children went missing. A tall figure in the woods, photographs that showed the impossible, then showed nothing at all. But even as I typed, the words felt less real, less certain, like writing fiction instead of journalism, like documenting a nightmare rather than investigating a story. I found myself driving back to Stirling City one last time, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't explain. The town looked different now, smaller, quieter, as if some vital energy had been drained from it. I parked at Reservoir Park and walked the trails that led into the forest. The woods were silent, except for the whisper of wind through pine needles. No bird songs, no rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. Just the deep, waiting silence of a place that held secrets it would never reveal. I stood at the edge of the tree line, camera in hand, and tried to remember why I'd come here. There had been a story, something important I'd been investigating. Something about children and photographs and a figure that shouldn't exist. But the details kept slipping away, and soon I was just a journalist standing alone in an empty forest, wondering why he felt so afraid. As I turned to leave, I thought I heard something in the distance, the faint sound of children laughing and playing, but when I looked back, the woods were empty and still. I drove home to Sacramento and never returned to Stirling City. Sometimes late at night, I dream about tall shadows and missing photographs. In the dreams, I remember everything clearly. The 14 children. Mary Thomas, the evidence that proved the impossible was real. But when I wake, the memories fade like morning mist, leaving only the lingering sensation that something important has been forgotten. I keep a notebook by my bed now, hoping to capture the dreams before they disappear. But every morning the pages are blank. Some stories I've learned refuse to be told.